The Save-On Foods on Dunbar Street closed at 10, and by 9:45, most of the checkout lanes had gone dark. Rowan Stokes was in the last open lane, his basket sitting on the belt, a loaf of bread, a container of peanut butter, 2 cans of soup, a small bag of apples, and a box of cereal his 7-year-old son, Gabe, had begged for that morning, because the cartoon bear on the box looked friendly. Rowan had said maybe. Then he'd stood in the cereal aisle for 3 full minutes doing math in his head before putting it in the basket. He looked exhausted in the way that had nothing to do with one bad night. It was the kind of tired that had settled into the lines around his eyes and the way he held his shoulders slightly forward, like he was bracing for something that hadn't stopped coming. He was 41. He worked dispatch for a small trucking company out of Burnaby. Phone calls starting, at 6 in the morning, and often not ending until past 7 at night, and he still came home to make dinner because Gabe needed someone to make dinner. That was how it had been since Rowan's wife left 18 months ago. Not dramatically, not with a fight that explained everything, but quietly and then completely, like a tide going out. He wasn't bitter about it anymore. He'd moved through bitter and landed somewhere flatter. He just kept going. The cashier, a college-age kid named Dev, was scanning items when Rowan noticed the woman in the lane beside him. Except there was no lane beside him. The store was nearly empty, and she wasn't really in a lane at all. She was standing near the self-checkout machines that had been switched off for the night, holding the hand of a little girl who looked about 5, maybe 6. The girl was wearing a puffy pink vest that was slightly too big, the zipper pull missing, and she had the kind of curly red hair that looked like it hadn't been brushed since morning. She wasn't crying or fidgeting or pulling at her mother's sleeve the way most kids her age would. She was standing completely still, watching the belt move Rowan's groceries forward. Not the belt, actually. The cereal box. She was watching the cereal box with the cartoon bear, and the expression on her face wasn't want. It was something quieter than want. It was the look of someone who'd already decided not to want it. Rowan had seen that look before. He'd seen it on Gabe once, 2 weeks after the separation, when Rowan had only had $40 left until Friday, and Gabe had asked if they could get ice cream after school and then immediately said, "It's okay, never mind, I know." Gabe was 7. He shouldn't have known. The fact that he did had kept Rowan awake that whole night. The woman, holding the girl's hand, was maybe mid-30s, with dark circles that no amount of sleep seemed to have touched in a long time. Her coat was a thin navy quilted jacket. Fine for September, wrong for November in Vancouver. She had a reusable grocery bag over one shoulder that looked nearly empty. She was talking quietly to the girl, not looking at the cashier, not looking at Rowan, scanning the store in a way that wasn't browsing. She was checking to see if anyone was watching her. Rowan looked at Dev, who was bagging bread and not paying attention. He looked back at the woman. She'd spotted something, one of the floor staff pushing a cart toward the back, and she took a small breath and turned toward the exit, tugging the little girl gently. The girl went. But before she turned all the way around, her eyes cut back one last time to the cereal box on the belt. Rowan didn't make a decision. That's the only way he could later describe it. It wasn't a decision so much as his body moving before the thinking part caught up. He picked up the cereal box from the belt and said, quietly enough not to startle anyone, "Hey, excuse me." The woman stopped. Her back straightened in a way that meant she'd been stopped before, by store security, by bylaw officers, by people who had authority over her situation, and she was preparing for it. He held up a hand open, the cereal box still in it. "Sorry, I didn't mean to, I'm not." He stopped himself and tried again. "My son has this cereal at home already. I grabbed it by mistake. Do you want it?" It wasn't true. He'd stood in the aisle for 3 minutes, deciding whether to buy it. The woman turned slowly. Up close, she looked like someone who'd been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and had stopped expecting anyone to offer to help. She had green eyes, tired green eyes, and she looked at Rowan with the careful look of someone trying to figure out whether kindness was really what was being offered, or something else. "That's okay," she said. "We're fine." Jill, her daughter standing beside her, said nothing. She was looking at the floor now, which was somehow worse than when she'd been looking at the cereal. Rowan lowered the box slightly but didn't put it back on the belt. What's her name?" he asked. The woman hesitated. "June." He looked at the little girl. "Hey June, do you like bears?" June looked up. She didn't answer right away. She was the kind of kid who thought before she spoke, which Rowan recognized because Gabe was the same way. Then she said, very seriously, "What kind of bears?" "The kind that like honey," Rowan said. "This bear on the box likes honey, and apparently cereal, which seems like a lot for one bear." June considered this. Does he share? Rowan looked at the box. The cartoon bear was holding a spoon with an expression of extreme cereal enthusiasm. I think so. He's got a pretty good face. June almost smiled. She got halfway there and then seemed to remember she wasn't supposed to want anything, and the almost smile folded back into her serious expression. Rowan looked at the mother. I've got a kid at home. I know how it goes. Please take it. The woman's jaw tightened, not in anger, in pride, and pride is different. Pride hurts on the way down. I appreciate it, she said carefully, but we don't need charity. I know you don't, Rowan said. And he meant it. He wasn't looking at her like she was someone to be pitied. He'd been looked at that way himself, by his mother-in-law after the separation, by his neighbor who kept offering casseroles with a particular expression on her face. He knew the weight of it. I'm not doing this because I think you can't handle it. I'm doing it because I've got a 7-year-old at home who already has this cereal, which I apparently forgot, and it feels stupid to buy it again. He held the box out again. She looked at it for a long moment. We haven't eaten today, she said, and she said it, the way people say the thing they've been not saying, all at once, flatly, because keeping it in had become more exhausting than saying it out loud. Rowan put the cereal box down on the conveyor belt and looked at Dev. Can you hold on 1 second? Dev blinked. Yeah, sure. Rowan walked back into the store. He was gone for maybe 4 minutes. When he came back, he had another basket, soup, crackers, peanut butter, a carton of orange juice, cheese, and another box of the cereal with the bear on it, because there had been 2 left on the shelf. He put the basket on the belt beside his own. The woman stared at it. I'm not trying to make you feel bad, Rowan said. I'm really not. He paused. Last February my car broke down and I couldn't make rent and I had $38 to last 2 weeks. My neighbor, Mrs. Park, she's 74, she showed up at my door with a pot of soup and she said, don't argue, just eat it, and then she left before I could say anything. He looked at the basket. I never got to pay her back, so. The woman was quiet for a moment, then she said, that's not how it works, you don't even know us. No, Rowan agreed, but she didn't know me either. June had been watching this whole exchange with the concentrated attention of a child who understands that something important is happening, but can't yet name what. She tugged her mother's sleeve. Mom, she said softly. Yer. Her mother looked down. June didn't say anything else. She just looked up at her, and whatever passed between them in that look, the woman closed her eyes for just a second, and then opened them again. Okay, she said. Her voice was tight. Okay, thank you. Her name was Paige. Paige Sorrento. She told him while Dev was ringing everything through, in the careful way people introduce themselves when they've been in survival mode long enough that small social rituals feel almost foreign. June held onto the sleeve of her coat and watched the items come off the belt one by one with an expression of serious, focused attention, as though she was responsible for making sure everything made it into the bags. Paige had moved to Vancouver from Calgary 6 months ago, following a job offer that had evaporated 2 weeks after she'd signed a lease. The lease had lasted 3 months. Since August, she and June had been staying at her cousin's place in East Van. A 1-bedroom that already had 3 people in it. Until 2 weeks ago, when the cousin's boyfriend moved in and the space ran out, she'd been sleeping in her car, a 2009 Civic with a heater that worked inconsistently, and she'd been spending days at the library with June, using the Wi-Fi to send job applications, buying coffee to justify the table. She said all of this in a flat, matter-of-fact voice, not looking for sympathy, just filling in the facts because Rowan had asked, and she was too tired to perform composure anymore. Rowan listened. He didn't do the thing people sometimes do, which is to immediately start offering solutions. He just listened, which was what she needed first. June, meanwhile, had accepted a cracker from the open sleeve Paige had said she could open, and she was eating it with the specific solemnity of a child who has learned not to eat fast even when hungry, because eating fast draws attention. How long have you been parking the car in the same place? Rowan asked. Paige glanced at him sideways. Why? Because the city starts ticketing after 72 hours on most residential streets, he said. I learned that the hard way, when I was 18 and broke and thought I'd figured out a system. Something flickered in her expression. Not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. We move every couple of days. There's a lot by a church on 16th that's been okay. Rowan nodded. He thought about his apartment, a 2-bedroom in Fraserview that he'd kept after the separation because Gabe needed to stay in the same school. The 2nd bedroom was Gabe's. Rowan slept on a pull-out couch in the living room on the weeks Gabe was with him, because he'd told Gabe to take the room, the whole room, all his posters and his books, and his Lego sorted by color, and Gabe had been so relieved he hadn't said anything about it for months. Tonight was a Rowan week. Gabe was home with the upstairs neighbor, a retired woman named Jan, who sat with him for $10 an hour and reported that Gabe was, quote, very opinionated about documentaries. He was thinking about the couch. It was not a large couch, but it folded out into something, and there were extra blankets in the hall closet. And November in Vancouver in a car with an inconsistent heater was not a sustainable situation for an adult, let alone a 5-year-old. This is going to sound forward, he said. Paige looked at him. I've got a pull-out couch. My son's home tonight, he's 7, and I've already cleared the awkward part of this where I explain why a stranger is offering you a couch, which is that the city is cold and that lot by the church on 16th has about 4 more days before someone notices. He paused. It's not much, but it's a roof. Paige didn't answer immediately. She was looking at him with the expression of someone running calculations. Who he was, what he wanted, whether kindness came with terms attached. Rowan understood the calculation. He'd done it himself. I'm not. He started. I know, she said. And she seemed to, actually. Some people have a quality that reads clearly, and Rowan had it. A kind of uncomplicated decency that was visible in how he'd handled the whole thing, the lack of performance in it, the fact that he'd said the true thing about Mrs. Park's soup rather than something easier. She looked at June, who had finished her cracker and was looking up at her with those serious eyes that Paige clearly could not say no to on a cold night in November. One night, Paige said. One night, Rowan agreed. He texted Jan from the parking lot to let her know he was on his way back with company and asked if she could stay an extra 30 minutes. Jan texted back, company, Talus free. He texted back, don't. She texted, extra $10 or I'm telling Gabe you got a girlfriend. He texted, it's not like that. She texted $10. He paid her the extra $10. Gabe was awake when they came in. Technically he was supposed to be asleep, but he'd arranged himself on the couch in an extremely unconvincing pretend sleep position, and opened his eyes the moment the door opened with the energy of someone who had absolutely not been sleeping. He sat up, looked at Paige, looked at June, and looked at his dad. Rowan said, this is Paige and June. They're going to stay tonight. Gabe looked at June. June looked at Gabe with her serious expression. Do you like documentaries? Gabe asked. June considered the question carefully. About what? Animals, mostly. But there's a good one about volcanoes. Volcanoes are good, June said. And that was that, apparently. Rowan made toast because it was late, and no one needed a full meal after the grocery store. But June ate 2 pieces with peanut butter, and then fell asleep sitting up at the kitchen table, her head tipping forward until Paige caught it, and looked at Rowan with an expression he didn't have a word for, gratitude, and grief and exhaustion all at once, sitting in her face without any of them winning. He set up the pull-out couch while Paige put June down, and he found the extra blankets. And he told Paige there was hot water if she wanted a shower, and he was very careful to make all of it normal sounding, because he understood that what made charity bearable was when it was delivered without ceremony. He slept on the floor of Gabe's room that night, with a camping mat and a sleeping bag, which Gabe thought was a profound adventure, and refused to stop talking about until almost 11. In the morning, Rowan made oatmeal and Gabe showed June the volcano documentary, and Paige sat at the kitchen table with Rowan's laptop. He offered it without being asked, and spent 2 hours on job applications while Rowan worked his dispatch phone from the couch and tried not to make too much noise. She had 3 interviews by the following week: a dental office on Broadway, a property management company in Kitsilano, and a bookkeeping position at a logistics firm in Burnaby that she was most qualified for and most nervous about. Rowan had nothing to do with any of that. She found those on her own. But she'd found them from a kitchen table that was warm, with Wi-Fi that worked and coffee that was fresh. And sometimes the thing that changes everything isn't a miracle, it's just a table. She and June stayed 4 nights. On the 4th day Paige's cousin called, the boyfriend had moved out apparently explosively, and there was a bedroom available again if she wanted it. She said she'd think about it. Then she spent an afternoon making phone calls, and by evening she'd found a transitional housing program in New Westminster that had a spot for a single mother with a dependent child, a program she hadn't known existed until she'd had enough stability to look for it. The morning she left, June gave Gabe a drawing she'd made on the back of a grocery receipt. 2 kids standing in front of a box of cereal with a bear on it, the bear drawn in red crayon with an enormous happy expression. Gabe kept it. He taped it to the inside of his closet door, which for Gabe was the highest honor. Paige shook Rowan's hand at the door, which felt formal and exactly right. If June ever asks what a good person looks like, she said, I'm going to tell her she already knows. Rowan didn't have an answer to that. He stood in the doorway and watched them get into the Civic, and held up a hand when Paige looked back once before pulling out of the parking space. Gabe was beside him. He pressed his nose against the glass of the sidelight window until the car turned the corner. Are they going to be okay? He asked. Rowan thought about it. He didn't lie to Gabe anymore, not since the cereal aisle moment, not since he'd decided that honesty was what his son actually needed. I think so, he said. I think they've got what they need to be. Gabe seemed to accept this. He was quiet for a second and then said, Dad, can we get more of the bear cereal? Yeah, Rowan said, we can get more. He put his hand on the top of Gabe's head, the way he always did, and they went back inside. And the morning light came through the kitchen window the way it always did, thin and white and November cold. And Rowan put the kettle on and thought about Mrs. Park's soup, and how something that was given without ceremony on one ordinary Tuesday had been passed forward on another ordinary Tuesday, and how that was probably how most goodness moved through the world. Not announced, not remembered by anyone except the people who needed it, handed off quietly in grocery store parking lots and living rooms and doorways, while the city went about its business, and the November light came through the glass, and the kettle boiled. I keep thinking about that cereal box. The way Rowan stood in the aisle for 3 full minutes, doing the math in his head deciding, and then bought it anyway, not because he could easily afford it, because his son had asked for it that morning. With a face that already knew the answer might be no. That moment, before anything else happened, before Paige and June were even in the picture. That moment already tells you everything about who Rowan is. He was a man who had learned to be honest with himself about what he had and what he didn't, and he still chose to show up for his kid. That's not a small thing. Most people, when life keeps taking from them, start to close inward. They protect what's left. Rowan did the opposite. He stayed open again. And I think that's why he noticed June at all. Because you can only see someone else's quiet struggle when you haven't looked away from your own. There's something I've come to believe, not from any book or any particular teaching, but just from paying attention to the people who seem to actually get through things. The ones who make it aren't always the ones with the most resources. They're the ones who stayed honest, who looked clearly at what was in front of them and didn't flinch from it. Rowan knew he had $38 once. He didn't pretend otherwise. He knew a woman and her daughter had been in a car in November. He didn't look away. That kind of clear-eyed honesty, being willing to see a situation for exactly what it is, that's what makes real help possible. You can't help someone you've talked yourself out of noticing. And then there's what Paige did. People talk about receiving kindness like it's the easy part. It isn't. Accepting help when you're proud, when you've been managing on your own, when you're terrified that needing something means you've failed somehow, that takes its own kind of strength. Paige said no twice before she said yes, and then she said yes anyway, because June was standing there with her serious eyes, and because some part of Paige still had enough left in her to recognize that survival isn't weakness. Pushing through, day after day, library Wi-Fi and a Civic with a heater that only sometimes worked. That's not failure. That's someone who hadn't stopped. What happened next came directly from that. Paige found those 3 interviews herself. Rowan didn't find them for her. He just gave her a table and a Wi-Fi connection and a few days where she wasn't spending all her energy on staying warm. That's the thing about cause and effect in real life. It's rarely dramatic. It's usually just, one thing became possible, and then another thing became possible. A soup pot on a doorstep becomes a cereal box in a grocery store, becomes a job application sent from a warm kitchen. The goodness doesn't disappear, it just moves. I think about Gabe keeping that drawing taped inside his closet door. He's 7. He doesn't have a word yet for what he witnessed. But he's already learning something. That noticing matters, that having a little doesn't mean you have nothing to give, and that the people who show up for others tend to be the same people who were once shown up for themselves. You learn that by watching. He's watching. That's the part that stays with me. Not the grand gesture. The ordinary Tuesday evening in a grocery store. One person who had been helped before, deciding it was his turn.